Hi, my name is M. Underwood, and I am the author of A Story of Love and Hate, The Cowboy.
I'm Allie, and today we're diving into the heartbreak and healing of M. Underwood's A Story of Love and Hate, The Cowboy. Let's get started. How fast is the instant connection? Are we talking instant spark or full on chaos?
So, the instant connection in The Cowboy is immediate. It's intense, and honestly, it's a little reckless. From the moment Rachel sees Jason walk out of the bathroom at Carl's, everything in her shifts. It's not just attraction, it's physical, it's emotional, and it's all consuming. It within hours they go from strangers to something that feels almost impossible to control. And that first night alone shows exactly how fast it moves. The tension, the strip poker, um, the way they keep getting pulled back to each other, even after being interrupted. It's chaos from the start. And the pace never slows down. They go from that first meeting to a deep emotional attachment almost immediately. And, which is part of what makes everything that comes after hit so hard.
And I understand there's a lot of intensity that comes after that and some very meaningful messages. What message did you want to convey about healing after toxic relationships?
I think the biggest thing is that leaving is not the same as healing. Um, when Rachel leaves Brad, she does leave him. She never goes back to him. But what he did to her, it doesn't disappear. It follows her into everything that comes next, including her relationship with Jason. It affects how she reacts, it and how quickly she attaches, and how she handles conflict. Um, I wanted to show that healing is messy. It it can be You can be out of a toxic situation and still carry it with you. You can still make mistakes because of it. Um, Healing is not about being perfect. It's about becoming aware and growing and doing better over time. And, those toxic relationships, especially when they're physical, like the one with Brad was, they follow you. You just have to be aware of the things that it causes.
Now that you mentioned healing is messy, is there a moment where the readers might not actually like your characters?
Yes, so there are several very specific moments where readers are going to struggle with both Rachel and Jason. There's a point where Rachel makes the decision to break up with Jason, and it is not clean or easy for her to do. And it comes from emotion, confusion, and everything she's still dealing with internally. And, but it's a choice that shifts everything, and it hurts both of them in a way that's hard to undo. And so, there's also a moment where Rachel sleeps with Mark. And that's one of the biggest moments where readers may feel frustrated with her, or even disappointed in her. Uh, it would be very hard for them to be able to come back from that. It's not just the act itself; it's what it represents in her downward spiral, and the emotional place she is in at the time. On Jason's side, readers, they're going to struggle with him when he starts dating Karen. It creates distance, tension, and kind of a sense of a betrayal, especially knowing the connection that he still has with Rachel. That choice adds another layer of complication, to an already really fragile situation, especially because the viewers or the readers are reading this going, oh my God, we want them to get back together. And that kind of makes them think, oh, well, this isn't going to happen now. There's also the moment when Karen finds out about Rachel. and Jason chooses to leave her. He chooses to leave Rachel there. That moment hits hard because it shows where he is emotionally and the decision he's willing to make, even if he hurts Rachel. Um, Probably one of the more difficult ones for readers when it comes to Jason is going to be when he leaves Rachel at the apartment. And, that leads into her overdose. That's a breaking point, not just for Rachel, but for the entire story. It's a moment where everything feels like it was completely falling apart. And these moments, they're not meant to make the characters easy to love. They're meant to show how flawed they are, how much damage they cause, and how far they have to grow throughout the story.
So, what's a moment in the book where everything changes for the characters, but readers might not actually realize it?
I think one of the biggest moments where everything changes is when Jason tells Rachel he loves her, and it happens fast. From the outside, it can feel too quick, almost questionable, like it shouldn't mean as much as it does, because of how soon it happens. But to them, it's everything. That moment is not built on time. It's built on intensity, connection, and everything they have already felt in a short time. When he says it, it's not casual. It carries weight. Even if it doesn't look like it should yet. That's what makes it so important, because from that point on, everything is different. The relationship is no longer just something exciting or physical. It becomes emotional in a way that raises the stakes immediately. Every choice, every mistake, every moment of distance matters more because those words are now a part of it. Readers might question it at first, because of how fast it happens, but that is what makes it real to the story. Sometimes love does not follow a timeline, that makes sense to anyone else. And that moment is where everything shifts, even if it doesn't fully show itself until later in the book.
What's a moment where readers will just have to pause and process?
So I think one of the biggest moments is when Rachel overdoses and then finds out she's pregnant. I think by that point, everything in her life has just completely fallen apart, and her relationship with Jason is broken. She is spiraling, and she has reached her absolute lowest point. Um, and then suddenly, in the middle of all that devastation, she finds out she's pregnant. And it's a moment that just completely shifts the emotional weight of the story, and it forces readers to process everything that led her there. Um, I mean, she doesn't even want him to know what's going on. She doesn't want anyone to know. And I think another major moment is when Rachel leaves rehab and Jason is there waiting for her. It's kind of the other side of the emotional circle. After everything that they put each other through, the readers don't know what to expect anymore, and the relationship has been pushed to its limits. And so seeing him there, it carries quite a quiet emotional weight. And so it's not a dramatic moment. I didn't make it big, but it's the first real sign that maybe healing and forgiveness and hope are still possible after everything that's happened to them.
That's a really beautiful moment in a very messy situation. How did you approach writing a love story that isn't always easy to root for?
So I mean, I approached this story by just telling the truth, even when it was really uncomfortable. Because this story is based on real experiences, I didn't want to soften it or reshape it, into something more likable or easy to root for. I wanted it to reflect what actually happens in relationships, the good, the bad, and the moments that are hard to explain, the moments that are hard to defend. There are parts of this story where the characters make decisions that are frustrating, they're painful, and sometimes they're really hard to understand. But those moments are real. They come from emotion, from trauma, from confusion, and from not always knowing how to handle something that matters that much. I didn't write this to create the perfect love story. I wrote it to show what love can look like when two people are still growing, still making mistakes, and honestly still trying to figure themselves out. Because sometimes love's not easy to root for, especially while you're in it. And but that doesn't make that love any less real.
And speaking of growing, does Rachel ever make a decision that readers might not forgive her for?
So yes, I think the biggest one is when Rachel breaks up with Jason and sleeps with Mark. Um, the breakup itself is emotional, reactive. It's not fully thought through. A lot of the readers are going to be disappointed for her doing that because it's for the wrong reasons. Um, it comes from everything Rachel's dealing with internally, her past, her confusion, her inability at that point to handle something real. Um, and, that decision changes everything between them. And then when she sleeps with Mark, it hits harder. That moment is not just about the act itself, but it's about where she is mentally and emotionally when she does it. It again, it comes from her downward spiral when she's lost and hurting. That's after she finds out about Jason and Karen, and she's not making decisions from a healthy place. And a lot of that is a reaction. It's a screw him type scenario, and it's a moment where they're going to feel disappointed in her, and struggle to understand her choices in that. Together those two decisions, they represent a turning point in her story. They show how far she falls, um, and how damage is done, how much damage is done. And it's not just to the relationship, but to herself. Um, and whether the readers forgive her or not, it becomes part of the emotional experience. But these moments, they're essential for her growth and to the journey, and she has to fight her way back from.
In what ways does Rachel grow that might not be obvious at first?
So Rachel's growth it's not loud. It's slow, it's uncomfortable, and it's easy to miss if you're only looking for the big moments. I mean, she has those where they're obvious, but at the beginning, she's reacting to everything: her trauma, her emotions, her connection with Jason. She moves fast and feels deeply, and she doesn't always stop to think. As the story goes on, especially after things start to fall apart, she begins to recognize her own patterns, and she starts to understand how her decisions impact her relationship. She starts to take accountability instead of just reacting, and that shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens through mistakes, distance. It happens through reflection, and that's what makes it real.
Does this book have more heartbreak or healing?
There's a lot of both in this story, but the heartbreak comes first in this, and it does not hold back. From the very beginning with Brad, readers are thrown into pain and trauma, and seeing Rachel in survival mode, and that sets the tone early that this is not going to be an easy love story. And then when Rachel finds something real with Jason, the story does not stay in that safe place for long. It shows how something intense and meaningful can still fall apart when two people are not fully healed. The heartbreak is not just one moment, it builds over time. It shows up in the breakup, in the choices Rachel makes afterward, in the distance between them, and in the way both of them handle the damage instead of fixing it. It gets deeper when Jason starts dating Karen, with him walking away, and especially in the moments where Rachel hits her lowest point, including the overdose and the baby. But the healing is just as important, and it gives the story its purpose. The book shifts into what happens after everything falls apart. It focuses on the downward spiral, the consequences of the choices made, and the slow process of facing all of it. The healing is not immediate. It is not easy. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. And at times it is painful in its own way, sometimes even for the reader. It takes growth, it takes accountability. It takes both of them having to confront who they were and what they did, and not just to each other, but what they did to themselves. Um, the healing only matters because of how much damage came before it. And without the heartbreak, it wouldn't carry the same weight. And without the healing, the heartbreak wouldn't mean anything. And so this story, it doesn't choose one over the other. It shows how they exist together and how sometimes you have to go through one completely before you can begin the other.
Since parts of the story are based on real experiences, how did that influence your writing?
I mean, it influenced everything. Because this isn't just a story I created. This is part of my life. Um, and I had to go back and I had to relive it in order to write it. And so, Rachel is very clearly me. This is my story. These are my experiences and my journey. Jason is based on a real person who is still in my life today and is a very important part of my life. Just with the experiences we had, he's a very important person to me. And he's one of my best friends now. And that made writing this even more emotional, because it's not just revisiting my past. It's writing about somebody who is a real person who still matters to me in the present. There were moments in this book that were very hard for me to put on paper. Writing it forced me to revisit moments in my life that I had not allowed myself to fully sit in for a really long time. And some of the things included experiences that I had never shared with anyone, not even him. And that made the process both emotional and at times overwhelming. Um, there were chapters that I had to step away from after finishing because of how heavy they were. Some of them I had to step away from while I was in the middle of writing them. The drug use in the story is real. It's in writing those parts, it brought back memories and emotions that I had worked hard to move past. I'll be celebrating 20 years this coming July, and revisiting that period of my life was not easy. Um, the hardest part was writing about the baby. That was something I had buried really deep, and never fully dealt with. It was something I had never told anyone before, not even him. And so putting that into the story meant facing it in a way I never had before. It put me in a position that, more importantly, it meant having a conversation I never thought I would have to have with him. It was a conversation I never wanted to have with him. But I couldn't put it in the book and not give him the respect to have the conversation. Because of all of that, the emotions in this book are not imagined. Um, lots of this book are based on real situations that I went through, and those emotions are lived, and I think that that is what gives the story its weight, its honesty, and the depth that readers feel when they go through it. So, first, I just want to say a thank you so much to Allie for having me on and featuring my book. This was very much out of my comfort zone, and so, but I still very much enjoyed it. A Story of Love and Hate the Cowboy is actually book one of what will be a 4-book series, following Rachel and Jason through the different stages of their lives. Book two is already out now, and it's called The Ranch, and it's told from their son Cason's point of view 17 years after the first book. And then right now I'm writing book three, which is called Starting Over, which follows their daughter Harper when she's in her late 30s. And then the final book will be called The Long Goodbye, which will be told from Jason's point of view when he and Rachel are in their late 70s to early 80s. And so this series becomes a full lifetime story about love and heartbreak, family, and everything that happens between. So I really hope you enjoy my book, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you to M. Underwood for being here today, and go check out A Story of Love and Hate, the Cowboy. I'll have it linked in the comments. And join us next Saturday for another Plotopsy.